All right, hello everybody. I am here today to show you how to paint these little heart lollipops in gouache. And I just want to show you some of the supplies that I have here a minute. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop in the chat and I can do my best to answer. But I'm using some Winsor and Newton gouache, the Arteza gouache, which is such a good deal. I did link this in the description. I'm not sponsored by any of these companies. I just like their products. And then I have the whole bean artist gouache, which is amazing. So really enjoy all of these. I use them together, but most of my gouache will be one of these three brands. And then I just want to show you how I store some of my gouache. So now I do use gouache straight from the tube as well, which I have a little piece of portion of some palette paper here that I'm going to be using for that, but you can use any kind of palette really. But I like these little storage boxes because I like to just let my gouache dry, and then what I do is before I start painting, I grab a little spray bottle, and actually so before I started the stream, I just went around and did like a little spray, and then I might do like a second little round too. So yeah, my spray bottle's kind of acting up here. I've got a second option. So spray with a little water. There we go. So what I do then is just kind of let that soak. Now these little boxes do come with lids, but what I found is some gouache molds. So like you could temporarily use that if you wanted to, but you probably want to do to let them dry and just re-wet them. Okay, so what I'm going to start with here is the background. And so I was thinking actually about changing some colors a little bit. So I was pulling out my color wheel here to just kind of look, because the background here is blue and then one of the lollipops is also blue, which, there's enough differentiation, but I thought it might be fun to kind of change that up a little bit. So it could either be I change my background or I change the color of the lollipop. So it really depends. I could do either way, but I was just kind of looking at the color wheel. We have the warm with the pink kind of over in this range. We've got the blue. So maybe like kind of a greenish could be cool, or I could go like more violet and go that way. I think I might go like a purpley violet, and I think we'll make the background blue still, and then we'll change the other lollipop to like more of a violet. It could even be kind of a blue violet too if I wanted. And what I'm going to do for my background is I could just use some colors that I have in here, but I think what I'm going to go ahead and do is just take a little of the cerulean blue that I have, and I'm putting it just on a palette there. And then I'm going to take some of my white, and I'm just going to mix these. Actually, I'm going to size up my brush a little bit for the actual painting, but you could mix with a palette knife, but I'm always a little lazy and I just mix with my brush. So when you're deciding on a background, you can decide, do you want like one flat color, or do you want to see a little variation in your background color so it's not totally flat? Like if you look at the reference closely, there is a little variation there, but it's really up to you. And then I am going to bring a little water into this, so I mix a little water in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just start with this background. And so what I'm going to do is just I'm taking this flat brush. This is a 1/2 inch flat. And I'm just going around. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of fill this in. Now, occasionally, I want a little bit more water just to help with the fluidity of the paint, just to help it spread. But with gouache, you can paint it like watercolor. It's just the thing with gouache is it lifts back up with water. So with each new layer, you have to be a little cautious of that. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll end up going for just like a nice flat color in the background and just painting it on just a little bit of water, but keeping the opacity of the paint. Gouache is pretty opaque, but I could easily, you know, do anything I want here. And the thing to note about gouache is it does dry just a little bit darker than when you're painting it when it's wet. So just keep that in mind. Now with gouache, I could also, like I do with acrylic, do a wash over the entire thing, the entire surface, which by the way, this is Canson cold press watercolor paper. I'm just using it in a little sketchbook, and I have it taped off with some washi tape. I typically like washi tape because it doesn't rip my paper, which is nice. Some folks like to paint their subject first and then fill in the background, and I do both, honestly. But for this particular one, I decided I wanted to go ahead and get my background in there first. And I like these flat brushes because they get you nice flat areas of color, and you can kind of manipulate them, move them around to get cut in to smaller areas. Occasionally I'll size down, but a lot of times I do try to use the biggest brush possible for the area that I'm painting. And I find it helpful to move the paper or move my sketchbook around a little bit just to make it easier, so I'm not having to hold my hand, in weird positions. It makes sense to move the canvas if possible. And this, you could easily vary this background color. I think a lot of colors could work. The idea when we start painting the lollipop, and I'll show you when I change the color to, like I said, I think I'm going more of a violet or blue violet. Again, I want to differentiate it more from the background. I just want a little bit more contrast, but I'll show you how we can use the value structure that's there, meaning the lights and darks that are there, to choose a new color. Turn that a little bit. And again, these flat brushes, just really nice for cutting in and getting these edges. Now with gouache too, again, it can lift back up. So as you're cleaning your brush, and make sure you're really drying it off, because if you even get like a little drop of water onto your painting, it can cause it to lift back up, which can be very frustrating. And just kind of rotate this, cut in. And gouache is very opaque, so it can cover up your pencil lines. So don't worry about, making dark lines. A little bit different than watercolor that way. Gouache also has a matte finish, which a lot of artists like that too, because it makes it easier to photograph. You're not getting all that reflection. And you can still see where some of the paint is wet a little bit, but other than that, it dries pretty flat. All right, so now that I've got that done, I can decide where I want to go next. It's really up to me. I think I'm going to go ahead and work on the hand, and then we'll move our way up to the lollipops. And so for brush, I mostly use just like some flats and some rounds. I feel like that covers a lot of what I like to do, but you can use any kind of brushes you want. You can try some different ones out if it's not working for you. I think it's just nice to have different sizes for different things. So I'm just kind of pulling out some different flats and rounds, having those ready to go. Now I do have some colors in here that kind of can work with some skin. A lot of times I like to put some unexpected pops of color in the skin as well. And actually, here's a good example I can show you lifting. I actually painted some blue where this is skin. So what I'm going to do really quick is I'll show you can lift a little. So if I put some water down and kind of tap, now it's going to stain a little bit, but the gouache being opaque can cover it. So there we go. Just lift that back up. And then since I lifted some of the actual background, I'm just going to use this brush to bring that back in. There we go. So yeah, you can lift up with gouache, which can be nice. So yeah, I'm just going to start using some different kind of, I'm going to get a little bit of the pink in there. And the reason I want to put some pink and some warmer tones into the skin is I want to mimic some of the warm tones of the lollipop too. Actually, I'm changing my mind now that I'm kind of mixing up. I'm getting kind of a purpley color that I like for the lollipop. So I'm going to actually switch gears and I'm going to do this one where I swap the blue out for this purple color. And so what I'm going to do is look where it's a little bit darker values, and I'm going to paint those first. Well, I'm kind of actually painting, let me see, more of a middle value. I'm going to go a little bit darker on those edges there. I'm just looking for shapes and lines. Where do I see this little bit of this darker value? And then I do want to get a little bit of a round in here, smaller round. Get a little bit of those darker values. And again, I'm changing this, so I'm not trying to match the color to the original. I'm just trying to look at where it's lighter, where it's darker, and match values. And I really just start to look for, again, little shapes that I see. I look for direction of line. Is it curved? Is it straight? Thick, thin? All those kinds of things can be helpful. Remember, you're building too. You're going to build brush stroke by brush stroke. We're going to build up this lollipop. So don't even worry if it looks like a lollipop. Just focus on lines, shapes, color, value. The lollipop will appear. And it's nice too, now that I've got my background done, I can actually refine some of these little edges. And I'm going to mix a little white in there as well. Now, when your paint is wet, you can kind of blend it together. But when it's dry, it'll layer more on top. And again, it doesn't need to look exactly like the photo. The idea is for it to, for us to look at the information, like where it's light, where it's dark, and that can help us. But we don't need to make it look exact. That's why changing colors can be fun. So I'm actually going to size up my brush. I'll do that. Sometimes I'll get stuck and I'll just start, I'm using a small brush and I'll keep using it and then expand to some larger areas. So I'm going to go back to this brush here and just kind of work in a little bit of color. Grab a little bit more white here. I just like to move my brush around, just kind of capture some different kind of strokes, layer some lights and darks on top of each other. It's not super duper flat, so I want to create, that kind of impression. And two, this is where as I start adding more water and overlaying it on top of colors, it will start lifting up. So I want to just be careful of how much water I'm adding in. And so with gouache, I usually don't do heavy strokes. I kind of like to do lighter strokes and gently kind of layer it on top and build it up that way. And then there's some highlights too, but we'll come back for those. I like to blacken first, work on some other areas, and then come back. It's not necessarily that I'll finish something completely, before moving on. And the sticks are mainly white, right? But there is a little bit of shadow on those. So I'll come back to those. I'm going to look at the other lollipop there a minute. And I do have some kind of different pinks here already. So I'm going to take a little pink from here. It's like a magenta. And then I've got, kind of more like a bubblegum pink that I'm going to grab. And then, of course, I'll be using some white too. Again, I'm just looking for light areas and dark areas. If you lay a color down and you feel like, oh, it could be darker, don't be afraid to push your darks darker because that's how we get depth. It's how things look more dimensional. It goes from looking like a flat shape to a 3D form. And then, within the sucker, there's all these little impressions. So it's not this totally flat thing, flat color. I'm kind of just looking for any hint of a directional mark or where it's light, where it's dark. I'm going to size down a minute to a little bit of a smaller brush because that helps me get into some of these areas over here. And if you want to darken a pink, you can always try like a little green into it, or maybe there's another version of a darker magenta you can use to darken a value. I mean, you can use black, but in this instance, for this particular painting, I'm not going to. So sometimes I'll look for other ways to darken colors because you can get lots of different combinations and create, different light values, different dark values, just between mixing different colors, even without black and white. So sometimes it's good to just try and see what you come up with. Just because you mix a color doesn't mean you have to use it. And I'm the type that I don't care if my color is the same as the reference. Like, that's not my goal, unless for some reason I just absolutely love the color. But, I really am more concerned about, like I said, the value structure, where it's light, where it's dark, because that's the information I need. Like, where's the light coming from? Is there shadows? That sort of thing. But color, you can decide, and style and all of that, you can decide. It doesn't need to be, our goal isn't necessarily to copy a photo exactly. We're just, using it as a jumping off point to create something. You can certainly, when it comes to reference photos, take your own as well. Some people like that. Some people like royalty free ones like from Unsplash just because, it's not so personal. You just get to practice and not, some people think that just feels better. So I definitely do a combination of both. You can't always, take your own reference photo of a lion or something like that, right? Like sometimes you need to um, look for one to use. And I occasionally will just add a little bit more water into my brush. Again, it's just to help the paint flow a little bit, but I'm not trying to really thin it down too much. But I do, again, look for light areas, dark areas, direction of line. All that stuff can be really helpful. And all these little light and dark spaces that we see, or areas, they're all creating little shapes. And if you just look for the little shapes and try to break that down as much as you can, and believe me, that comes with practice. The more you do it, the better you'll get. But if you just keep working through that, you'll really be able to paint anything you want, because anything can be just broken down and simplified. And that's the goal. And that's not always easy to do, to simplify something on our own like that. So, again, the more you paint, you're just going to get better and better at that. It is a skill to be developed. But then you'll start looking at any object and you'll start breaking it down. And instead of thinking, well, how do I paint a lollipop? How do I paint a nose? How do I paint an ocean? Questions like that will change to, well, what shape is it? And what values do I see? And you'll realize you can break anything down and be able to capture it. But then, of course, being an artist, it's fun and essential to put your own spin on things. So again, when you have references or things that inspire you, don't feel like you have to be bound to them and, make it look exact. You don't need to. Just can create your own kind of flow with it, and just, and actually sometimes even not thinking about it too much can be helpful. Sometimes we just overthink things. So yeah, just really try to break down shapes, look for values, think about how might you interpret texture of something. Brush strokes can be short, long. Sometimes I'm tapping my paintbrush. I'm not even doing strokes. Sometimes I'm kind of swirling my paintbrush around. So different ways you move your brush and different types of brushes are going to create different types of texture too. So try out different brushes, try out different things, and just, you'll start to figure out what you like. I'm just kind of adding this little dark areas. I'm going to let this dry for a minute, and then we'll come back and revisit. We're going to add some highlights and push some darks and do a few things there. Again, these sticks, because they're mainly white, I still like to, even though my paper is white, gouache is a little bit different than watercolor. Like watercolor, your paper is your white. You're typically masking it and saving it. Whereas gouache, I tend to like to paint white where something is white. And again, it's not always pure white anyway. There isn't a ton of shadow on these sticks, but I'm going to put just a little bit. So I did squeeze out some fresh white here, and I would use it. It's actually pretty, it looks kind of sad in my my little paint palette there. So, and with white, you can, of course, use black to create grays, but sometimes blues can make nice shadows with white. So it just kind of depends. And the other thing this white will do is get rid of my pencil lines too. So I can cover that up with my brush stroke here. Because I don't want those to feel outlined. Outlining can be nice. There's a time and a place for it, but it tends to read as more cartoony, more illustrative. So it just depends what you're trying to go for. And then as you're, putting a little water on your brush, sometimes what I'll do is just blot my brush a little bit so it's not like overloaded with water. Because when it's overloaded with water, you might make a mess and get an area you didn't mean to. So I'm just kind of doing a little bit longer strokes here. I am getting a little blue from the background that's coming into the stick. So a couple things I could do there, either roll with it or let the area dry and then put more white on top of it. And then I'm going to do this side, and then I'm going to flip my sketchbook a little bit again. Sometimes it's helpful to move your sketchbook, then try to, make your hand go in a weird position that, you're not going to get the brush stroke that you want. So just rotate that, of course, stick my finger in some of my paint in the process. Now, if you get a little paint outside where you mean to, there's a couple options there. If you've got your background color still, you can always use your background color to, reel things in a little bit, or you can, expand the object a bit, but, that kind of happens. Straight lines come with practice. A little bit of water though, not soaking wet. You don't want your brush to be all water and then it, like I said, it lifts up paint where you don't want it to. But having a little bit of water just makes the paint flow a little bit smoother and causes you to, well, or I should say, will allow you to get smoother lines and brush strokes than if your paint is dry. I'm going to paint just a little bit more of my background. And sometimes, you can just leave it too, but I'm just being a little picky. All right, I'm gonna leave that for now, let that dry. Hopefully that'll blend okay. And then let's go ahead and take a look at this hand, and then we'll add in some highlights, and we're getting close. And you can make things as detailed, as you want them to be. You don't have to finish so quick either, so. And oftentimes I do like to mix my own skin tones, but I am kind of just using some various neutrals that I have. And with the hand, really the same idea as I'm looking for light areas and dark areas. And really just trying to build up the layers. There's almost some kind of pinker tones in there a little bit. I mentioned that earlier, and sometimes I want to capture a little bit of that too because it'll mimic a little bit of what's happening up here. And it's nice to just have a balance of colors. You can also mix colors directly on your canvas as well. You don't have to mix everything off of it. Sometimes it can be fun to just mix directly and see kind of what happens, see what kind of cool marks you can make and make it interesting. And the cool thing about gouache being so opaque is you can paint light on dark just like you can dark on top of light. It's nice. You can do a little bit of both. And then I want to, oops, sometimes I'm bad about rinsing off my brush enough when I go to a new color. Get that shadowed area in there. And we want dark areas because dark areas go back in space, light areas come forward. So when you're painting, you want a range of both. And I'm not worrying too much about detail just yet. I'm going to add some more detail to the hand. I'm just making the hand a little bit more expressive, just kind of way too much water. Whoops. Lift that. Um, just want to see a little bit more expressive. I don't want it super flat. And if the thought ever goes through your mind, like, well, how do I paint that? How should I paint that? Again, just try to look for shapes, colors, lines. Try to break it down. If you get to a point where like your values are too close or you can't differentiate something, try to look at the surrounding areas. Did you get the values right? Do you need to make something darker? Or maybe you just need some kind of defining line. So there is that kind of stuff that might pop up. You can see a little bit of my line there that wasn't quite the same color. So if I wanted to, I could go back and mess with that. We'll see. I want to add just a few little highlights, a couple places on the hand. And where it's lighter, just kind of adding. So the next thing I want to do is just a little touching up. So now we're on to just all that little small line work, adding in highlights, pushing. I also like to push dark areas a little bit too. So yeah, I can keep kind of messing with different areas. Like I said, light areas and dark areas. Well, I think we'll go ahead and call that good. I could keep going, but I think it's nice. Keep it nice and simple. Um, just kind of clear some stuff out of the way, and I will peel the tape off. And by the way, I sometimes I will save these. Like if there's enough pile of a color, or I think I want to go back to something, I might let these dry, save them, re-wet them. But I don't save them long term or anything like that. But and after I let this sit too, I can decide if I want to go back and add some more. Like I said, it's up to you when something's finished. Oops. Let's see. There we go. And there is still a little bit of area that's still damp through here. Um, by the way, if I did want to fix this, I'm just going to leave it. But if I did want to go back in, if you take a damp brush with very clean water and make sure your brush doesn't have any paint in it too. But what you can do is just kind of work that edge, go back and forth with just a little bit of water, and that can soften that. So, and that's true of any edge that dries with wash that you don't quite like, you can go back and soften it. But some other things just looking at this initially that I could do is like this area could be a little darker. I could still pull out a few more highlights in the hand if I wanted to work that more. I definitely could. But I do sometimes like just taking a break, stepping away from it, and then coming back and looking at it with fresh eyes too. So zoom out a little bit. Well, thanks so much for being here and watching. And as always, if there's ideas that you have would like to see me paint, let me know in the comments. And yeah, have a great day.